The city stirred to life as the first rays of sunlight painted streaks of gold across the bustling streets of Brooklyn. In a cramped but tidy apartment, Emily Harper adjusted her black apron, her mind already running through the long list of tasks awaiting her. Bills stacked precariously on the counter served as a constant reminder of her struggles. At 25, Emily's dreams of returning to college for a degree in business administration felt like distant stars, beautiful but unreachable. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the tiny kitchen as Emily's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, called through the open window. "Emily, dear, don't work too hard today," Mrs. Anderson said, with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Emily waved back. "I'll try, Mrs. Anderson. Don't forget to take your medicine." With a sigh, Emily grabbed her bag and headed out, weaving through the familiar streets to the subway station. As the train rumbled toward Manhattan, she clutched her tote bag tightly, rehearsing polite smiles and apologies in her mind. The upscale Aurora's Table restaurant sat nestled among the high rises of Manhattan, its glass facade gleaming in the morning sun. Stepping inside, Emily was greeted by the stern gaze of Mr. Daniels, the restaurant's sharp-tongued manager. "You're late," he snapped, though the clock showed she still had 3 minutes to spare. "Sorry, Mr. Daniels. It won't happen again," Emily replied, keeping her tone even. The restaurant buzzed with activity, the staff preparing for another day, catering to Manhattan's elite. Emily quickly fell into the rhythm of the day, balancing trays and weaving between tables with practiced grace. Her best friend and co-worker Kara joined her during a brief lull. "Double shift today?" Kara asked, her voice tinged with sympathy. Emily nodded. "Gotta keep saving. College isn't getting any cheaper." It was mid-afternoon when the air in the restaurant seemed to shift. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit strode through the doors, exuding an aura of quiet authority. Richard Ellis, the enigmatic business tycoon, had arrived. Whispers rippled through the staff as the hostess hurried to escort him to the private dining area. Emily couldn't help but notice his piercing gaze as he surveyed the room. There was something about him, calm, commanding, and utterly unreadable, that made her uneasy. "Ah, Harper," Mr. Daniels barked. "You're handling table 12. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yes, Mr. Daniels." Richard's lunch progressed quietly, though his presence loomed large in the room. Emily attended to him with professional precision, ensuring his wine glass was never empty and his requests were met without delay. As he stood to leave, Richard placed a sleek black wallet on the edge of the table, seemingly by accident. Emily's gaze lingered on it for a moment. It would be so easy. Just one move, and her financial worries would disappear. But the thought quickly vanished. Taking a deep breath, she scooped up the wallet and carried it to Mr. Daniels' office. "Mr. Ellis left this behind," she said, placing the wallet on the desk. Mr. Daniels raised an eyebrow but took the wallet without comment. As Emily walked back to the dining area, a strange sense of unease settled over her. The day wore on, and Emily's feet ached from hours of standing. As the last customer left and the restaurant began to close, Mr. Daniels approached her with an unreadable expression. "Emily," he said, his voice uncharacteristically measured. "Mr. Ellis called. He specifically asked to meet you tomorrow." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Me? Why?" Mr. Daniels shrugged. "No idea. But when someone like Richard Ellis asks for something, we don't question it. Be here at noon sharp." As Emily trudged home that night, her thoughts raced. Why would a man like Richard Ellis want to meet her? What could he possibly want? Exhaustion eventually overtook her curiosity, but as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. The next day, Emily arrived at Aurora's table, a full hour before her shift. Her reflection in the glass door revealed a carefully pressed uniform and a face filled with nerves. She couldn't shake the question swirling in her mind. Why did Richard Ellis, a man whose face graced the covers of financial magazines, want to meet her? Had she done something wrong? Was it about the wallet? Inside, the restaurant was a quiet hum of preparation. The staff moved quickly to ensure everything was perfect for their VIP guest. Mr. Daniels, uncharacteristically tense, caught sight of Emily and motioned her over. "He's in the private lounge," Mr. Daniels said, barely masking his own apprehension. "Whatever he asks, just say yes." Emily frowned. "I don't even know what this is about." "Doesn't matter," Mr. Daniels snapped, his usual gruffness returning. "Do not mess this up, Harper." The private lounge was bathed in warm light from the crystal chandelier above. Richard Ellis sat in a high-backed leather chair, an air of calm authority radiating from him as he sipped his espresso. Beside him, a younger man in a sharp suit, who Emily assumed to be his assistant, was flipping through a leather-bound notebook. "Miss Harper," Richard said, rising from his chair and extending a hand as she approached. "Please, have a seat." Emily hesitated, then sat on the edge of the plush chair opposite him. The assistant closed the notebook and stepped out of the room, leaving them alone. "Thank you for meeting with me," Richard began, his tone measured. "First, I want to commend you for your honesty yesterday. Many wouldn't have done what you did." Emily managed a small smile. "It was just the right thing to do." "Precisely," Richard replied, leaning back slightly. "And it's a quality I value deeply, especially in my line of work." He paused, studying her intently, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I have an offer for you, Miss Harper. One that I believe could change your life." Emily's breath caught. "An offer?" Her thoughts raced as Richard continued. "I'd like you to work for me as my personal assistant," he said. "It's not an ordinary job. You'll have access to the inner workings of Ellis Ventures and be directly involved in projects that shape industries." Emily blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Why me?" Richard's lips curled into a faint smile. "Because honesty like yours is rare, and because I see potential in you. Potential that you might not even see in yourself." Emily shook her head slightly, still processing his words. "I don't know, Mr. Ellis. I've never worked in an office before, let alone a company like yours." "That's precisely why I think you'll thrive," Richard replied. "You'll bring a fresh perspective, untainted by the cynicism of corporate culture." He leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking with hers. "This isn't just a job, Emily. It's an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to build a future far beyond what you've imagined." Despite the weight of his words, doubts nagged at her. After the meeting ended, Emily left the restaurant and headed home, her thoughts a whirlwind of excitement and uncertainty. She shared the news with Mrs. Anderson over tea that evening. "Oh, my goodness, Emily," Mrs. Anderson exclaimed, her eyes wide. "This could be your big break." "But what if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough?" Emily replied, wringing her hands. Mrs. Anderson reached across the table, placing a comforting hand over Emily's. "You've been waiting tables and juggling jobs for years, dear. If you can do that, you can do anything. Don't let fear hold you back." Her best friend, Kara, echoed the sentiment later that night. "Take the leap, Emily. What's the worst that could happen?" The next morning, Emily made her decision. With trembling hands, she dialed the number on the business card Richard had given her. "This is Emily Harper," she said, when Richard's assistant answered. "I'd like to accept the position." Excellent, the assistant replied. Mr. Ellis will be pleased. Your first day is tomorrow. Be at Ellis Ventures by 8 a.m. Ellis Ventures stood like a monument to power and ambition in the heart of downtown Manhattan. Its sleek glass facade reflected the morning sun as Emily approached, clutching her bag tightly. The lobby was a hive of activity, with well-dressed professionals hurrying to and from the elevators. At the reception desk, a polished woman in her 40s greeted Emily with a smile. Miss Harper, welcome to Ellis Ventures. Please follow me. Emily was led to a conference room where a stack of documents awaited her. An orientation packet detailed the company's structure, policies, and her new responsibilities. She quickly realized the enormity of what she had signed up for. The day was a blur of introductions and instructions. Richard's longtime secretary, Margaret, took her under her wing, showing her the ropes, while offering nuggets of advice. You'll learn quickly here, but watch your back, Margaret warned. This is a competitive place, and not everyone will be thrilled about you being so close to Mr. Ellis. Emily nodded, grateful for Margaret's candor. The other employees weren't overtly hostile, but she noticed the sidelong glances and whispered conversations as she passed. One senior executive, Victoria Hale, made no effort to hide her disdain. So, this is the new hire, Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. How quaint. Despite the tension, Emily pressed on, determined to prove herself. Her first real test came when Richard asked her to coordinate a high-profile meeting with international clients. She spent hours ensuring every detail was perfect, from the presentation materials to the catering. The meeting went off without a hitch, earning a rare compliment from Richard. Well done, Emily. You've exceeded my expectations. As the day wound down, Emily found herself in Richard's office, organizing some documents. Her gaze fell on a photograph tucked in the corner of his desk. It showed a younger Richard, standing beside a woman whose features were strikingly familiar. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized the woman looked exactly like her late mother, Maria Harper. Miss Harper? Richard's voice jolted her out of her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Emily swallowed hard, pointing to the photograph. Who is this? Richard's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. That's a story for another day, he said quietly. But it's one you deserve to hear. As Emily left the office that evening, her mind raced with questions. Who was Richard Ellis, really? And what connection did he have to her mother? The answers she knew would change everything. The morning sun reflected off the towering glass facade of Ellis Ventures, casting shimmering rays onto the bustling Manhattan streets below. For Emily Harper, the building now symbolized both opportunity and intimidation. As she stepped through the revolving doors into the grand lobby, her senses were overwhelmed by the energy of the corporate world. Hurried conversations, clicking heels on marble floors, and the faint hum of technology in the background. Today marked the start of her integration into Richard Ellis's empire. She was stepping into a world vastly different from the modest life she'd known, a world she wasn't entirely sure she belonged to. Emily was greeted by Margaret, Richard's secretary, whose warm smile provided a small measure of comfort. Welcome to the Lion's Den, Margaret quipped, handing Emily a neatly bound schedule. First stop, your workstation, and a tour of the floor. The executive floor of Ellis Ventures was a stark contrast to the cozy, slightly chaotic environment of Aurora's table. Here, sleek black desks and cutting-edge technology filled every space, complemented by panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline. Employees, dressed immaculately in designer suits, moved with a purpose that left Emily feeling out of place in her modest blouse and skirt. Margaret led Emily to a desk, positioned just outside Richard's expansive office. "This is your command center," Margaret explained. "You'll handle his schedule, correspondence, and the occasional personal request. It's a demanding role, but I think you'll do just fine." Emily nodded, absorbing the instructions. "Thank you, Margaret. I'll do my best." Margaret's expression softened. "Listen, Emily, you're here because Richard sees something in you. Don't let anyone else make you feel otherwise. That said, keep an eye out for Victoria Hale. She's the senior vice president and doesn't take kindly to newcomers, especially ones she perceives as threats." It didn't take long for Margaret's warning to manifest. During a meeting that afternoon, Emily joined a group of executives reviewing a critical presentation for an upcoming partnership pitch. Richard had asked Emily to sit in and take notes, an unusual move that drew whispers among the attendees. Victoria Hale, impeccably dressed in a tailored crimson suit, wasted no time asserting her dominance. "Miss Harper," she said with a saccharine smile, "it's unusual to have someone from hospitality sitting in on these meetings. I hope you're not overwhelmed." The condescension in Victoria's tone was clear. Emily clenched her pen, but forced a polite smile. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Hale. I'm here to learn and support Mr. Ellis in any way I can." Richard, seated at the head of the table, glanced at Emily with subtle approval before addressing the room. "Miss Harper's input is valuable. Let's move on." Victoria's thinly veiled glare spoke volumes, but Emily remained composed. Inside, however, she couldn't shake the nagging doubt that she was out of her depth. Over the next few weeks, Margaret proved to be a steadying force for Emily. She guided her through the nuances of corporate life, from decoding Richard's cryptic instructions to navigating office politics. Despite the support, Emily often felt like she was walking a tightrope. The high-stakes environment left little room for error. Her first major challenge came in the form of a last-minute request from Richard, organizing a high-profile dinner for potential investors. With only 24 hours to pull it together, Emily scrambled to coordinate everything, from securing a private dining room at a prestigious venue to ensuring the menu met the dietary preferences of the guests. By the time the dinner began, Emily was physically and emotionally drained. She lingered in the background, watching as the investors mingled with Richard. Just as she allowed herself a moment of relief, Victoria approached, a glass of champagne in hand. "I'm not bad, Miss Harper," Victoria said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But let's see how long you can keep up." Emily met her gaze with quiet determination. "I'm not here to compete, Miss Hale. I'm here to do my job." Victoria raised an eyebrow but said nothing, walking away with a faint smirk. One evening, after the office had mostly emptied, Emily stayed late to organize Richard's desk. The soft glow of his desk lamp illuminated a collection of personal items, a leather-bound notebook, an antique pen, and a photograph in a silver frame. Emily's gaze lingered on the photo, a younger Richard standing beside a woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman bore an uncanny resemblance to her late mother, Maria Harper. "Miss Harper," Richard's voice startled her, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I was just tidying up," Emily stammered, stepping away from the desk. Richard walked over, his gaze fixed on the photograph. He picked it up, a rare softness crossing his features. "That's Maria," he said quietly. "She was someone very important to me." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "She looks exactly like my mother." Richard's eyes met hers, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. There's a reason for that, he said finally, his tone heavy with emotion. But it's a conversation for another time. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, yet Emily couldn't shake the memory of that photograph. Her mind raced with questions. What was Richard's connection to her mother? Why had he chosen her for this position? Margaret noticed Emily's distracted demeanor and pulled her aside one afternoon. "You're holding something back," Margaret said gently. "If you're going to survive here, you need to keep your head in the game." Emily nodded, appreciating Margaret's concern, but knowing she couldn't share what was weighing on her mind. Not yet. As Emily left the office late one night, her phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust. Not everything at Ellis Ventures is as it seems." Her stomach dropped. Was this related to the photograph, or was it something else entirely? As the elevator doors closed behind her, Emily realized she was stepping deeper into a world far more complicated and dangerous than she had ever imagined. The morning after the text message, Emily Harper walked into Ellis Ventures with a mix of anxiety and determination. The mystery surrounding Richard Ellis and her mother lingered in her mind like a shadow, while the cryptic warning she had received added an unsettling layer to her already complicated situation. Her instincts told her she was on the brink of uncovering something life-altering, but she wasn't prepared for just how deep the truth would cut. Later that afternoon, Emily's determination reached a breaking point. With her hands trembling slightly, she knocked on the door to Richard's office. "Come in," his deep voice beckoned. Emily entered to find him standing by the massive window overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the sunlight casting sharp angles across his face. "Mr. Ellis, may I have a moment?" He turned, his piercing blue eyes scanning her face. "Of course. Is something on your mind?" She hesitated before producing the photograph she had seen on his desk. "I found this while tidying up the other night," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This woman, she's my mother. Maria Harper, isn't she?" Richard's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably until he finally sighed, walking toward her. "Yes," he admitted, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "She was your mother." Emily's breath caught. She had suspected as much, but hearing the confirmation left her stunned. "What? What does this mean?" Richard gestured to the chairs near his desk. "Please sit down, Emily. I owe you an explanation." As Emily perched on the edge of her chair, Richard began his story. "Your mother and I met over 25 years ago. She was one of the most remarkable women I'd ever known. Intelligent, compassionate, and fiercely independent. We fell in love, but I was young, ambitious, and consumed by the idea of building my empire." He paused, his expression clouded with regret. "When Maria discovered she was pregnant with you, I wasn't ready. I told myself I couldn't let anything or anyone distract me from my goals. So, I made the worst decision of my life. I gave her money and asked her to raise you far away from my world." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "You abandoned her," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and disbelief. "You left her to raise me alone while you built your empire." Richard nodded, his face etched with guilt. "I did, and not a day goes by that I don't regret it. By the time I realized the magnitude of my mistake, it was too late. Your mother had disappeared, and I couldn't find her. When I finally tracked her down years later, she was gone." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she processed his words. "She never told me any of this. She always said my father died before I was born." "I think she wanted to protect you," Richard said gently. She didn't want you to grow up resenting me, or worse, becoming like me. The weight of Richard's confession hit Emily like a tidal wave. She stood abruptly, pacing the room, as she struggled to contain her emotions. Do you have any idea what my mother went through? She worked herself to the bone to give me a chance at a better life. And all this time, you were out there living in luxury, oblivious to the sacrifices she made. I know, Richard said quietly, and I don't expect your forgiveness, Emily. But when I saw you at the restaurant that day, I knew I had a second chance to make things right, to give you the opportunities I failed to give your mother. Emily turned to face him, her green eyes blazing. So what? You hire me as your assistant and think that makes up for everything? You think you can buy my forgiveness? No, he replied firmly. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hoped that if you knew the truth, you might understand why I've been trying so hard to help you. For the rest of the day, Emily was a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness, and a faint flicker of curiosity about the man who claimed to be her father. She confided in Margaret, who listened patiently. You have every right to be angry, Margaret said. But whatever you decide to do next, make sure it's a decision you can live with. Don't let your anger cloud your judgment. That evening, Emily retreated to her small apartment, where she pored over the old photographs and letters her mother had left behind. She found herself wondering about the life Maria might have had if Richard hadn't abandoned them. Amidst the turmoil, Emily realized one thing. She couldn't walk away from Ellis Ventures, not yet. There were too many unanswered questions, too many secrets still lurking beneath the surface. The next morning, Emily returned to the office with a newfound resolve. Richard greeted her cautiously, as if unsure where they stood. I'm staying, she told him. But not because of you. I need to figure out who I am and where I fit into all of this. And I'm not going to let your mistakes define me. Richard nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Fair enough. But know this, Emily. You're stronger than I ever was. And if you're willing to give me the chance, I'll prove to you that I can be the father you deserve. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Victoria Hale entered, her expression cool and composed. Sorry to interrupt, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. We need to discuss the Project Phoenix proposal. Richard's demeanor shifted instantly, his face a mask of professionalism. I'll be there shortly. As Victoria left, Emily caught the sharp edge in her gaze, a warning or perhaps a challenge. That evening, as Emily worked late in the office, her phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. You're in deeper than you realize. Be careful who you trust. Emily's pulse quickened as she stared at the screen. The warning echoed Margaret's earlier advice, but now it carried an ominous weight. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was far from clear. One thing was certain. Whatever secrets Richard Ellis and Ellis Ventures were hiding, they were darker and more dangerous than she had imagined. The soft hum of city life buzzed around Emily as she stepped into the Ellis Ventures building the next morning. She had spent the night tossing and turning, her mind replaying Richard's confession and the cryptic warnings she'd received. As much as she wanted to focus on her work, her instincts told her that danger lurked in the shadows of the company she now found herself tethered to. As she rode the elevator up to the executive floor, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The anonymous messages, Victoria's icy demeanor, and Richard's veiled admissions all pointed to one undeniable fact. Ellis Ventures was hiding something big. When the elevator doors opened, Margaret greeted her with a sympathetic smile. Good morning, Emily. Sleep okay? Not really, Emily admitted, forcing a smile. Margaret leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Keep your eyes open today. There's tension in the air, and it's not just because of the quarterly report. Emily nodded, her chest tightening. Whatever was happening at Ellis Ventures, she was determined to uncover it, even if it meant walking straight into the lion's den. The day unfolded, with an almost suffocating sense of unease. Emily noticed the furtive glances exchanged among senior executives, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered the room, and files being hastily tucked away. Victoria Hale, in particular, seemed to be everywhere Emily turned. The polished, high-powered executive had a knack for making her presence known without saying much. Her sharp eyes followed Emily like a hawk, and her subtle smirks made it clear that she viewed Emily as an outsider. During a mid-morning meeting, Victoria presented a report on a project called Phoenix with an air of authority that left little room for questions. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the project than Victoria was letting on. After the meeting, Emily approached Margaret, who was gathering her notes. "Margaret, have you heard of Project Phoenix?" she asked casually, trying to keep her tone light. Margaret's hand paused mid-motion, and her expression flickered with unease. "Only in passing," she said carefully. "But if I were you, I'd tread lightly. Some things are better left alone." Later that afternoon, Emily found herself in the company archives, tasked with retrieving some documents for an upcoming board presentation. As she sifted through files, a folder labeled Phoenix Confidential caught her eye. Her pulse quickened as she glanced around the room, ensuring she was alone. Unable to resist, Emily opened the folder and began skimming the documents inside. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Records of offshore accounts, transfers to shadowy organizations, and partnerships with companies known for their questionable ethics. One page in particular detailed a series of payments labeled contingency funds, but the recipient names were redacted. "What the hell is this?" she muttered under her breath. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her out of her thoughts. Panicking, Emily shoved the folder back into the drawer and quickly grabbed the files she was supposed to retrieve. Just as she closed the drawer, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Digging through old paperwork, are we?" Victoria said, her voice smooth but laced with suspicion. Emily forced a smile. "Just grabbing what Richard asked for." Victoria stepped closer, her sharp gaze piercing. "Be careful, Emily. Curiosity killed the cat." Emily swallowed hard as Victoria walked away, her heels clicking ominously against the floor. That evening, Emily decided she needed help. She called Kara, her best friend and a cybersecurity expert, and asked her to meet at a nearby cafe. Over steaming cups of coffee, Emily explained everything: Richard's confession, the suspicious documents, and the warnings she'd received. "Sounds like you've stepped into a corporate thriller," Kara said, her tone a mix of concern and intrigue. "But seriously, Em, this isn't something you should handle alone." "I know," Emily said. "That's why I need your help. Can you look into Project Phoenix? Maybe dig up something on the executives, especially Victoria Hale." Kara frowned. "I'll see what I can do. But you need to be careful. If this goes as deep as it sounds, you're dealing with some dangerous people." The next day, Emily confronted Richard in his office. She laid out her suspicions about Project Phoenix, the shady financial records, and the odd behavior of the senior executives. To her surprise, Richard didn't deny any of it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. "Yes, Emily," he said, his voice weary. "There are things about this company that aren't ideal. But you need to understand that in the business world, things aren't always black and white. Sometimes, to achieve something great, you have to make compromises." Emily stared at him in disbelief. Compromises? Richard, this isn't cutting corners. This is illegal. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. If Ellis Ventures falls, thousands of people lose their jobs. The ripple effect would devastate communities, families. Do you think I want to operate in these gray areas? Of course not. But sometimes it's the only way to keep the company afloat. Emily felt her anger bubbling to the surface. You're justifying corruption to protect your empire. That's not leadership. It's cowardice. Richard's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and sadness. Be careful, Emily. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. That night, Emily received another anonymous message. They're watching you. If you keep digging, you'll regret it. The words sent a shiver down her spine. Who were they? And how much did they know about her investigation? Determined not to back down, Emily shared the message with Kara, who promised to trace its origin. But even as they planned their next move, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her every step was being monitored. As the week drew to a close, Emily's resolve only strengthened. She knew she was on the brink of uncovering something monumental, something that could either save or destroy Ellis Ventures. But with every step forward, the danger grew more palpable. One evening, as Emily left the office late, she noticed a black car idling across the street. The windows were tinted, obscuring the driver's identity, but the car's presence felt anything but coincidental. Clutching her bag tightly, Emily quickened her pace, her heart pounding. When she glanced back, the car was gone, but the sense of unease lingered. By the time she reached her apartment, her hands were shaking. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the stakes were too high to walk away now. As she locked her door and leaned against it, Emily whispered to herself, "Whatever's coming, I'm ready." The early morning light filtered through the blinds of Emily's modest apartment as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the anonymous warning on her phone. The words, "They're watching you. If you keep digging, you'll regret it," played on a loop in her mind. Her coffee sat untouched, growing cold. The tension in her shoulders was unbearable. How had she gone from a struggling waitress to this, embroiled in corporate secrets, shadowy threats, and dangerous power games? A knock on the door startled her. It was Kara, holding a laptop and wearing a determined expression. "I've traced part of that message," Kara announced as she stepped inside, dropping her bag onto the couch. "It came from a private network within Ellis Ventures. Someone on the inside is trying to scare you." Emily's chest tightened. Why would they bother warning me if they're already watching my every move? Kara raised an eyebrow. Maybe it's someone who doesn't want you digging, but also doesn't want you hurt. A conflicted ally, maybe? Or someone playing both sides, Emily muttered. When Emily arrived at the office later that morning, the atmosphere was even more charged than usual. Whispers followed her as she walked past desks, and the sharp glances from her colleagues made her skin crawl. In Richard's office, he was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the New York skyline. "You're late," he said without turning around. "I needed time to think," Emily replied, taking a seat across from his desk. Richard finally looked at her, his piercing blue eyes betraying a mix of frustration and concern. "Emily, the decisions you're making right now, who you trust, how you act, they have consequences for you and for everyone at this company." "Then tell me the truth, Richard," she challenged. "What's the full scope of Project Phoenix? How far does this corruption go?" Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "There are things you're not ready to understand yet. But let me be clear. If you keep pushing, you'll cross a line you can't come back from." Emily felt her frustration boil over. Maybe it's a line that needs to be crossed. Later that day, Victoria Hale cornered Emily in the hallway near the executive lounge. "You've been causing quite a stir, haven't you?" Victoria said, her tone icy. "Sniffing around where you don't belong. Asking questions you shouldn't be asking?" Emily crossed her arms, meeting Victoria's glare head-on. "If there's nothing to hide, why does everyone seem so afraid of me asking questions?" Victoria smirked. "You're naive, Emily. Do you think integrity alone can protect you in this world? Power is the only thing that matters here, and you're woefully unequipped to wield it." "I'd rather have integrity than power," Emily shot back. Victoria's smile faltered for a moment before she leaned in closer. "You're playing a dangerous game. People who ask too many questions don't last long here." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Emily seething but determined. That evening, Emily stayed late at the office. She was sorting through a stack of contracts when Richard walked in, a heavy look on his face. "I owe you an explanation," he began, closing the door behind him. Emily set the papers aside, crossing her arms. "I'm listening," Richard sighed, pacing the room. Project Phoenix started as an initiative to secure the company's future during a financial downturn. It was supposed to be temporary, just a way to keep us afloat. But it grew into something darker. "How dark?" Emily pressed. "Offshore accounts, partnerships with less than reputable entities, payments to ensure smooth operations." He paused, meeting her gaze. "I allowed it because I thought it was necessary. But now, I see the damage it's done." Emily's stomach churned. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I trust you," Richard said simply. "And because I need your help to fix this. But you have to promise me one thing: loyalty. If we're going to clean this up, we can't afford any missteps." Emily hesitated, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Could she even trust herself to navigate this storm? As Emily was leaving the office, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message appeared. "He's not telling you everything. Watch your back." Emily stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. The timing of the message was too precise to be a coincidence. When she showed the message to Kara later that night, her friend frowned deeply. "Whoever this is, they're clearly in the know. But the question is, are they trying to help you or manipulate you?" "Maybe both," Emily murmured. Kara shook her head. "You're walking a fine line, Em. One wrong move, and this whole thing could blow up in your face." The next day, Richard handed Emily a critical assignment, overseeing the approval of a major merger with a tech firm rumored to have ties to organized crime. "This is your chance to prove your loyalty," Richard said. "If we secure this deal, it could stabilize the company's future." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. And if the rumors are true? If they're involved in illegal activities? Richard's expression hardened. "We're not in a position to be choosy right now, Emily. Just make it happen." As she reviewed the documents, Emily realized the stakes were even higher than she'd imagined. Approving the merger would mean compromising her values. Refusing could mean losing Richard's trust and possibly her position at the company. That evening, Kara arrived at Emily's apartment with shocking news. "I dug deeper into Project Phoenix," she said, opening her laptop. On the screen were documents linking Ellis Ventures to bribery scandals and shell companies. But the most alarming discovery was a name tied to several transactions: Victoria Hale. "She's been orchestrating most of the shady deals," Kara explained. "Richard might not even know how deep this goes." Emily stared at the screen, a mix of anger and determination coursing through her. "Then It's time. I confronted Victoria directly. Emily cornered Victoria the next day, presenting the evidence Kara had uncovered. You think this will scare me, Victoria said with a sneer. You have no idea who you're dealing with. No, Victoria, Emily shot back. It's you who has no idea. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not backing down. Victoria's smirk vanished, replaced by cold fury. You're making a mistake, Emily. Cross me and you'll regret it. We'll see, Emily said, walking away with her head held high. That night, Emily returned home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Her heart raced as she stepped inside, scanning the room. Everything appeared untouched, except for a single envelope on her kitchen table. Inside was a photograph of Emily, taken from across the street earlier that day. Scrawled on the back were the words, "This is your last warning." Emily clutched the photo, her resolve hardening. Whoever was trying to intimidate her didn't realize one thing. She wasn't going to back down. Emily stared at the photograph on her kitchen table. The chilling words on the back, "This is your last warning," rang in her ears. Her hands trembled as she set it down, but her resolve only hardened. Whoever was trying to silence her didn't know that threats only fueled her determination. She picked up her phone and called Kara. "We're going all in," Emily said. "If they want to play games, we'll play too, but on our terms." The next morning, Emily and Kara met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Manhattan. Kara had brought her laptop, ready to dive deeper into the maze of Ellis Ventures' secrets. "Project Phoenix is just the tip of the iceberg," Kara said, scrolling through decrypted files. "There are layers upon layers of offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and payouts to influential figures. And look at this. Victoria Hale's fingerprints are all over it." Emily leaned over the screen, her mind racing. The documents revealed a pattern of bribes and illegal partnerships spanning years. But one name kept appearing alongside Victoria's: Langston Reed, a high-profile investor with a reputation for operating in the shadows. "Who's Langston Reed?" Emily asked. Kara raised an eyebrow. "Think of him as a puppet master. He invests in companies, manipulates their operations, and profits from the chaos. If he's involved, this goes deeper than we thought." Emily knew she couldn't confront Victoria or Langston without more evidence. She needed someone on the inside, someone who could access the files she couldn't. That evening, she approached Margaret, Richard's loyal secretary, in the office lounge. Margaret was pouring a cup of tea, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Emily's nerves. "Margaret," Emily began cautiously, "I need your help. There's something going on at Ellis Ventures, something big, and I think you already know what it is." Margaret sighed, setting down her cup. "Emily, you're playing a dangerous game. What makes you think you're ready for this?" "Because I have to be," Emily replied firmly. "If we don't expose this, it will destroy everything Richard has worked for, and everything I've worked for." Margaret studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I'll help you, but you need to understand, once we start, there's no turning back." Over the next week, Margaret and Emily worked covertly, piecing together more details about Project Phoenix. Margaret used her access to the company's archives to pull confidential files, while Kara continued to analyze the data. Late one night, Margaret handed Emily a thick file marked Top Secret. "This is the original proposal for Project Phoenix," Margaret explained. "It started as a legitimate plan to expand the company's influence, but somewhere along the way, it turned into something much darker." As Emily flipped through the file, her stomach dropped. The proposal included plans for partnerships with companies notorious for exploiting workers and skirting environmental regulations. Even worse, it outlined financial arrangements with corrupt officials in developing countries. This isn't just unethical, Emily whispered. It's criminal. Margaret nodded grimly. And it's all tied back to Langston Reed. He's been the driving force behind the corruption, using Ellis Ventures as his personal playground. Just as they thought they'd uncovered the worst, Kara called Emily with urgent news. "Emily, I found something you need to see," Kara said, her voice tense. They met at Kara's apartment, where she showed Emily a series of emails between Victoria and Langston. The emails detailed plans to frame Richard as the sole mastermind behind Project Phoenix, protecting Langston and Victoria from any fallout. They're setting him up, Emily realized. They're going to let Richard take the fall for everything. Kara nodded. And if we don't act fast, they'll succeed. Emily couldn't keep this from Richard any longer. That evening, she went to his penthouse apartment, clutching the damning files. Richard greeted her at the door, his expression wary. "Emily, what's going on?" "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside. She laid the files on his dining table and began explaining everything. The offshore accounts, the bribes, Victoria and Langston's schemes, and their plan to frame him. Richard's face darkened as he read through the documents. "I knew there were risks," he admitted, "but I didn't know it had spiraled this far out of control." "We can still fix this," Emily said, "but we have to act now. We need to expose Langston and Victoria before they can bury you." Richard looked at her, a mix of pride and regret in his eyes. "You're braver than I ever gave you credit for, Emily. Let's do this. Together." Emily, Richard, and Margaret devised a plan to gather irrefutable evidence against Langston and Victoria. They decided to set a trap, one that would force their enemies to reveal their true intentions. Richard invited Langston to a high-profile investor meeting, ostensibly to discuss future projects. Unbeknownst to Langston, the meeting room was equipped with hidden cameras and microphones. Meanwhile, Emily and Margaret worked behind the scenes to ensure that the evidence they'd gathered was ready to present to the authorities. On the day of the meeting, tension filled the air. Emily watched from a control room as Richard greeted Langston with a handshake and a practiced smile. "I've been hearing rumors, Langston," Richard began. "People are saying that Project Phoenix has attracted some unwanted attention." Langston smirked, his confidence unnerving. "Rumors are just that, rumors. As long as we stay ahead of the game, there's nothing to worry about." "What about Victoria?" Richard pressed. "I hear she's been concerned about certain liabilities." Langston's expression flickered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Victoria knows better than to make waves. She's loyal to the cause." As the conversation continued, Langston inadvertently revealed enough to implicate himself and Victoria in the scheme. With the evidence in hand, Emily and Richard presented their findings to the authorities. Federal agents raided Ellis Ventures' offices the next day, arresting Victoria and Langston on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and corruption. The news sent shockwaves through the business world. Media outlets swarmed Ellis Ventures, demanding answers. Richard held a press conference, standing beside Emily as he addressed the public. "Today marks a turning point for Ellis Ventures," he announced. "We are committed to transparency and accountability. Mistakes were made, but we are taking every step to right those wrongs." That evening, as Emily returned to her apartment, she found another envelope waiting for her. This time, it contained a single sheet of paper with a chilling message. "You may have won this round, but the game isn't over." Emily's eyes narrowed as she read the words. She knew the fight was far from finished. but she was ready for whatever came next. Emily stood by the window of her apartment, clutching the ominous note she'd received. The words kept replaying in her mind. You may have won this round, but the game isn't over. She thought of Langston Reed and Victoria Hale. They were behind bars now, their schemes exposed. But if they weren't the ones sending these messages, who was? Before she could dwell on the mystery, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her heart sink. Daniel Roberts, her estranged ex-husband. Emily, his familiar voice rasped when she picked up. We need to talk. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. There's nothing left to say, Daniel. We're done. You'll want to hear this, he replied, his tone smug. I know things about Ellis Ventures and about Richard. That would ruin everything you're building. Meet me tomorrow, or I'll go public. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Memories of Daniel flooded her mind. They had met when she was just starting at Aurora's table. Back then, his charm and ambition had captivated her, but their relationship quickly soured under the weight of his lies and manipulations. She had thought she'd left that chapter of her life behind, but now it seemed Daniel was determined to drag her back into his world of deceit. The next day, Emily met him at a small cafe in Queens, far from the prying eyes of the Manhattan elite. Daniel was waiting for her, looking smug and confident. Emily, he said with a grin, you look as stunning as ever. Cut to the chase, Daniel, she replied, crossing her arms. What do you want? He leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. I have documents, emails, financial records, even photographs. They prove that Ellis Ventures was involved in illegal activities long before you got there. And they also suggest that you knew about it all along. Emily's stomach churned. That's a lie. Maybe, Daniel shrugged. But it doesn't matter. The media loves a scandal, and they'll eat this up. Unless, of course, you're willing to pay for my silence. Emily returned to the office in a daze, but her resolve was firm. She wouldn't let Daniel manipulate her. She confided in Margaret, who immediately called Kara to help assess the situation. We need to get ahead of this, Kara said. If Daniel leaks those documents, even if they're fake, it could destroy everything you and Richard have worked for. Emily nodded. Then we fight fire with fire. Let's find out where he got those documents, and if there's a way to prove they're forgeries. Kara's tech skills came in handy once again. Within days, she traced Daniel's sources to a shady private investigator who had ties to Langston Reed. As Emily and her team worked to dismantle Daniel's threats, she received another shocking piece of news. Victoria Hale, despite being in custody, had somehow managed to leak information to the media. The headlines accused Emily of being complicit in Ellis Ventures' past corruption. Reporters swarmed the company's headquarters, demanding answers. Emily found herself at the center of a media storm, her every move scrutinized. At a tense board meeting, several executives voiced their concerns. This is too much bad press, one of them said. Maybe it's time for Emily to step back. Richard stood up, his voice cutting through the tension. Emily is not stepping back. She's the reason this company is still standing. We face these challenges head-on, not by abandoning the people who have brought us this far. With Richard's support, Emily doubled down on her efforts. She arranged a meeting with Daniel, this time at a secure location with law enforcement present. When Daniel arrived, he was taken aback by the presence of police officers and lawyers. What's going on? He demanded. Emily stepped forward, holding a stack of documents. This is what's going on, Daniel. We've traced your sources, and we know you've been working with Langston Reed. You're under investigation for extortion and fraud. Daniel's bravado faltered. You can't prove anything, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, but we can," Emily replied, her confidence unwavering. "And we will." Daniel's arrest made headlines, turning the tide in Emily's favor. The media shifted their focus from Emily's alleged complicity to Daniel's crimes and his connection to Langston Reed. At a press conference, Emily addressed the public. "The past few weeks have been challenging, but they've also reinforced the importance of transparency and accountability. Ellis Ventures is committed to doing what's right, no matter how difficult it may be." Her honesty and composure won over many critics, and the company's reputation began to recover. As Emily returned to her office that evening, she found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message: "You've silenced one threat, but there are others watching. Be careful, Emily. The game isn't over yet." Emily sat down, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't let her guard down. The fight for Ellis Ventures and her own integrity was far from over. Emily sat in her office, staring at the note left anonymously on her desk. The message was clear. The threats to Ellis Ventures and her leadership were far from over. But Emily was no longer the uncertain young woman who had walked into this corporate world months ago. She was resolute, ready to tackle whatever came her way. That morning she called for an emergency executive meeting. Richard, Margaret, and the board members gathered in the sleek conference room. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with the tension of recent events. Emily began with a deep breath. "We need to change the narrative. If we keep reacting to scandals, we'll always be one step behind. It's time we took control of the story and showed the world who we are now, not who we were." Richard nodded in agreement. "What are you proposing?" Emily's green eyes burned with determination. "Full transparency. A public press conference where we lay everything on the table. We admit the company's past mistakes, but we also show how far we've come and the reforms we've implemented. We make it clear that Ellis Ventures is not the company it used to be." Gasps filled the room. One board member, Mr. Klein, stood up. "Are you suggesting we openly admit to illegal activities? Emily, that could destroy us." Emily met his gaze without flinching. "If we hide, we'll look guilty. If we're honest, we regain control of the narrative and show the world we're committed to doing the right thing. It's a risk, but it's one worth taking." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Emily and her team worked tirelessly to gather evidence of Ellis Ventures' transformation. They compiled reports on the new ethical policies, community outreach programs, and sustainable initiatives the company had launched under her leadership. Kara, always a step ahead in the tech realm, created a digital timeline showcasing the company's journey. "We'll show them the whole story," she said. "The bad, the good, and everything in between." Margaret, meanwhile, reached out to key partners and beneficiaries of Ellis Ventures' philanthropic projects. Testimonials from employees, scholarship recipients, and community leaders began pouring in, painting a picture of hope and renewal. But even as they prepared, Emily knew the press conference would be a battlefield. The media wouldn't pull punches, and skeptics would be eager to tear her down. On the day of the press conference, the main auditorium of Ellis Ventures was packed. Journalists from every major outlet, stakeholders, and even a few protesters had gathered. Cameras flashed as Emily stepped onto the stage, flanked by Richard and Margaret. "Good afternoon," Emily began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Today we are here to address the questions, doubts, and accusations surrounding Ellis Ventures. We are not here to hide or deflect. We are here to confront the truth head on." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Ellis Ventures was once a company that operated in the shadows. Mistakes were made, Lines were crossed and trust was broken. But over the past year, we've worked tirelessly to transform this company into a force for good. Today, we want to show you what that transformation looks like. Emily's speech was followed by a powerful video presentation showcasing the company's efforts to rebuild its reputation and make a positive impact. The audience watched testimonials from former employees who had returned to work, students whose lives were changed by scholarships, and communities that had benefited from Ellis Ventures' sustainability programs. As the video ended, a journalist stood up. "Ms. Harper," he asked, "how do you respond to critics who say this is just a PR stunt?" Emily met his gaze calmly. "Change isn't an event. It's a process. What you see today isn't the end of that process, but a milestone. We don't claim to be perfect, but we are committed to being better every day. That's not a stunt. It's a promise." Despite the overwhelming positivity from the press conference, the backlash was immediate. Critics on social media accused Emily of using sob stories to distract from the company's past. Shareholders panicked, and Ellis Ventures' stock price took a hit. Richard approached Emily late one evening as she reviewed financial reports. "You took a big risk today," he said. "I hope you're prepared for the fallout." "I am," Emily replied, her voice steady. "This isn't about immediate results. It's about laying the foundation for the future." Richard smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "You remind me of your mother. She never backed down from doing what she believed was right, no matter the cost." In the midst of the chaos, an unexpected ally emerged, Victoria Hale. From her prison cell, Victoria released a statement acknowledging her role in the company's past corruption and praising Emily's leadership. "It's rare to see someone with the courage to do what Emily Harper is doing," the statement read. "Ellis Ventures is in good hands." The statement shocked everyone, but it also shifted the narrative. Even one of the company's harshest critics was now supporting Emily. With renewed momentum, Emily pushed forward. She met with key investors, reassuring them of the company's vision and long-term strategy. She also reached out to community leaders and activists, inviting them to work alongside Ellis Ventures to create meaningful change. At a town hall meeting, Emily faced questions from employees and the public. One young man stood up, his voice trembling. "Ms. Harper, why do you care so much? You could walk away and live a comfortable life. Why stay and fight?" Emily smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Because this isn't just about a company. It's about people. People like you, like me, like my mother, who believed in building something better. If I walk away, I let down everyone who's counting on us to prove that change is possible." The room erupted in applause. That night, as Emily returned to her apartment, she found another envelope waiting for her. Inside was a photograph of her mother, Maria Harper, standing next to a man she didn't recognize. On the back was a single word: soon. Emily's heart raced. The game wasn't over, and she was ready for whatever came next. The boardroom at Ellis Ventures was quieter than usual, the tension palpable. Emily Harper stood at the head of the table, her eyes scanning the faces of the executives who had weathered the storm with her. The fallout from the press conference had been severe. Stock prices plummeted, partnerships were questioned, and media scrutiny remained relentless. Yet, amidst the chaos, Emily felt a strange sense of calm. The hard part was over. They had told the truth. Now came the work of rebuilding trust. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "we've faced the worst. But from here on, it's about action. Words alone won't repair our reputation. We need to show the world who we are becoming." Richard Ellis, seated to her right, nodded in agreement. This isn't just about salvaging our business. It's about redefining it. Emily announced their first major initiative, a scholarship program for underprivileged youth, designed to create opportunities for those who had been overlooked by society. She dubbed it the Maria Harper Foundation, in honor of her mother's legacy. The launch event was held at a community center in Queens, where Emily addressed a crowd of young people, educators, and journalists. "My mother believed in the power of education to transform lives," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "This program is a promise. To her, to all of you, and to the future." As she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Despite the positivity surrounding the scholarship initiative, challenges loomed. A mysterious investor, Gregory Kane, emerged, purchasing a significant stake in Ellis Ventures. Kane's reputation as a ruthless corporate raider sent shockwaves through the company. Emily, Richard warned during a late-night strategy meeting, "Kane isn't just here to invest. He's here to take control." Emily's jaw tightened. "Then we need to make sure he doesn't get the chance." She began researching Kane's past dealings, enlisting Kara to uncover his hidden motives. What they found was alarming. Kane had a history of dismantling companies and selling off their assets for profit. As pressure mounted, Emily faced a difficult decision. Ellis Ventures had a profitable, yet ethically questionable division tied to fossil fuels. Selling it would provide the funds needed to expand their ethical initiatives, but risk alienating investors. After days of deliberation, Emily called a meeting with the board. "If we're serious about this transformation," she said, "we need to align our actions with our values. That means letting go of what doesn't serve our mission, even if it's profitable." The vote was close, but the board ultimately sided with Emily. The sale of the division was announced, drawing criticism from some investors, but praise from environmental groups. Richard approached Emily after the meeting. "You did the right thing," he said, "even when it wasn't the easy thing." Emily's decision to sell the division infuriated Gregory Kane, who began covertly rallying other investors against her. At the same time, she started receiving anonymous threats, emails, notes, and even a package containing a broken compass with a chilling message: "You've lost your way." "Someone's trying to scare me," Emily confided in Margaret. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "It means you're on the right track. But be careful, Emily. Whoever this is, they won't stop at threats." Emily tightened security around the office and her personal life, determined not to let fear derail her mission. One evening, while reviewing files in her office, Emily received a call from a community leader in Detroit. "Miss Harper," the man said, his voice filled with emotion, "because of your scholarship program, my son has a chance to go to college. I just wanted to say thank you." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she ended the call. In that moment, the weight of her responsibilities felt lighter. The work she was doing was making a real difference. Inspired, she decided to expand the foundation's scope, funding not only scholarships, but also mentorship programs and internships within Ellis Ventures. The tension between Emily and Gregory Kane reached its peak during a shareholder meeting. Kane publicly accused Emily of jeopardizing the company's profitability with her idealistic initiatives. Emily stood her ground. "Profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive," she said, her voice unwavering. "Ellis Ventures will succeed, not despite our values, but because of them." Her words resonated with many shareholders who saw the long-term potential of Emily's vision. Kane's motion to oust her as CEO failed, but the battle was far from over. Amidst the corporate chaos, Emily found solace in her late mother's letters. One night, while reading a particularly poignant letter, she came across a passage that struck her deeply. "Emily, the world will always test your resolve. Stay true to your values, and you'll find the strength to overcome anything." Those words became her mantra, guiding her through the storm. As Emily left the office late one night, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "Project Phoenix Lives." Attached was a file labeled "Confidential." Emily's heart raced as she opened the file, her screen flooding with charts, names, and numbers. The implications were clear. Someone was still operating within the shadows of Ellis Ventures, threatening to undo everything she had worked for. The battle for redemption was far from over. The tension in Ellis Ventures had shifted from internal challenges to an external adversary. Gregory Kane, the powerful investor who had infiltrated the company's board. His intent was clear: dismantle the company's ethical initiatives to maximize profit. Emily Harper, now fully entrenched as CEO, knew she was facing one of the greatest battles of her career. Kane had begun rallying support among shareholders, spreading rumors that Emily's reforms were bankrupting the company. Sitting in her office late at night, Emily reviewed the numbers again. While the short-term financial impact of selling the fossil fuel division had been significant, the long-term projections showed promise. She knew she was right, but convincing the board and investors was another matter. Margaret entered with 2 cups of coffee, setting one on Emily's desk. "You need to sleep, Emily," she said, her voice laced with concern. Emily shook her head. "Not until I figure out how to neutralize Kane's influence. He's planting seeds of doubt everywhere." Margaret leaned closer, her tone conspiratorial. "Then you need to dig into him. Find out what skeletons he has in his closet. Men like Kane always have something to hide." Emily called Kara, her tech-savvy best friend, for help. "I need everything you can find on Gregory Kane," she said. Kara nodded through the video call. "Give me a few hours. If there's dirt on him, I'll find it." As Emily waited, she focused on strengthening her alliances within the company. She met with senior executives, explaining her vision and laying out a roadmap for the next 5 years. Slowly, she began to win back their confidence. Meanwhile, Kara delivered on her promise. Late one evening, she sent Emily a detailed report. Gregory Kane was connected to several shell companies involved in fraudulent dealings and tax evasion. "Emily," Kara said during their follow-up call, "this is enough to force him out. But you'll need to be strategic. He's not the type to go down quietly." Emily's mind raced with possibilities. Confronting Kane directly could backfire, but exposing him in a calculated way could turn the tide. At the next board meeting, Kane made his move. He proposed selling off one of the company's most successful divisions, claiming it would stabilize finances. "This is the only way to ensure Ellis Ventures survives," he argued, his tone smug. Emily stood up, her gaze sharp. "Selling that division might boost short-term profits, but it would destroy everything we've built. This company isn't about survival. It's about leadership, innovation, and integrity." The room fell silent as the 2 adversaries stared each other down. Finally, one of the older board members spoke. "Miss Harper, what's your alternative?" Emily took a deep breath. "We make sacrifices where it matters. We let go of Kane's toxic influence and double down on our ethical initiatives. I have evidence that Mr. Kane's practices are not only unethical, but illegal. If he stays, Ellis Ventures will lose everything we've worked for." Gasps rippled through the room as Emily presented the documents Kara had uncovered. Kane's face darkened. "This is a witch hunt," he growled. "No," Emily replied, her voice steady. "This is accountability." The board voted unanimously to remove Kane, a decision that sent shockwaves through the business world. With Kane gone, Emily focused on damage control. She held a press conference to address the company's financial challenges and reassure stakeholders. "We are not just a company," she said, standing confidently at the podium. "We are a force for good. And while we've faced setbacks, our commitment to ethical leadership has never wavered." Her words resonated with the public. Slowly, trust in Ellis Ventures began to rebuild. One evening, as Emily walked to her car, she noticed a shadowy figure lingering nearby. Her heart raced as the figure approached. "Miss Harper," the man said, handing her an envelope, before disappearing into the night. Inside was a note. "You're playing a dangerous game. Stop now, or face the consequences." Emily clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't be intimidated. Despite Kane's removal, a new challenge emerged. A significant stake in Ellis Ventures was quietly purchased by an anonymous entity. Emily's attempts to trace the buyer led to dead ends, but the timing was suspicious. "This isn't over," Margaret warned. "Whoever bought those shares wants something." Emily nodded. "Then we need to be ready." One morning, Emily received a letter from a student who had benefited from the Maria Harper Foundation. "Dear Miss Harper," it read, "because of you, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. Thank you for believing in people like me." The letter brought tears to Emily's eyes. It was a reminder of why she was fighting so hard. That day, she announced a new initiative, a mentorship program connecting Ellis Ventures employees with scholarship recipients. As the company celebrated its latest success, Emily received an encrypted email. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. "Project Phoenix isn't dead. Watch your back." Emily's heart sank. The shadows she thought she had left behind were still lurking, and the battle for Ellis Ventures' soul was far from over. In the wake of Gregory Kane's expulsion and the unsettling threats Emily Harper had received, Ellis Ventures stood at a crossroads. The company's reputation was fragile, yet its resolve was stronger than ever. Emily knew the next steps would define its future. She called an emergency strategy meeting with the senior team, including Margaret and Kara. "We've won a battle, but the war is far from over," Emily said. "We need to solidify our position, not just as a reformed company, but as a pioneer in ethical business practices." Kara chimed in. "We should launch something transformative, something that proves Ellis Ventures is leading, not just surviving." Margaret nodded. "What about an initiative tied to education and clean energy? Those are our strongest pillars." Emily's eyes lit up. "A global initiative. Let's focus on bringing clean energy and technological education to marginalized communities. But we'll need partners. Let's leverage the goodwill we've earned to bring others on board." Over the next few weeks, Emily and her team worked tirelessly to secure partnerships. Emily reached out to government officials, nonprofit organizations, and even competitors in the energy sector. One particularly critical meeting took place in Washington, D.C., where Emily presented the initiative to a room filled with skeptical policymakers. "Ellis Ventures isn't just cleaning up its act," she began, her voice steady. "We're setting a new standard. This isn't charity. It's an investment in a sustainable future for all of us." By the end of her presentation, the room erupted in applause. Several key officials pledged their support, and Emily left the meeting with renewed confidence. Despite the professional momentum, Emily struggled with personal doubts. Late one night, she sat in her apartment, rereading her mother's letter. "Remember, Emily, what really matters is not where we come from, but who we choose to be." The words resonated deeply. Her mother had always believed in her, and now it was Emily's turn to live up to that belief. She picked up the phone and called her father, Richard Ellis. "Dad, I need your advice," she said softly. Richard, who had been keeping a lower profile since stepping back from the company, listened intently. "You've already proven you can lead, Emily," he said. "Now, it's about building something that lasts. Think beyond the immediate impact. Create a legacy." Inspired by her father's words, Emily proposed the Ellis Legacy Campus, a state-of-the-art education and innovation center powered entirely by renewable energy. The campus would serve as a hub for technological training, offering scholarships to underprivileged youth and hosting global summits on sustainable development. The announcement generated massive media attention. Emily became a frequent guest on talk shows, discussing the project and the company's journey of transformation. During one interview, the host asked, "What drives you to keep pushing forward, especially after all the challenges?" Emily smiled. "Because I believe in the power of change. If I can help even one person achieve their potential, it's all worth it." Amid the excitement, the shadow of Project Phoenix loomed large. One evening, as Emily returned home, she noticed a car trailing her. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding. The car slowed as she approached her apartment building. Suddenly, a man stepped out, holding a briefcase. "Ms. Harper," he said, his tone calm yet menacing. "You've made powerful enemies. Consider this a warning." He handed her the briefcase and walked away. Inside, Emily found a collection of documents, evidence of Project Phoenix's lingering influence within Ellis Ventures. At the bottom of the pile was a note: "Leave this alone or face the consequences." Shaken but resolute, Emily convened a secret meeting with Kara, Margaret, and a trusted legal advisor. "We can't let them intimidate us," she said. "If we ignore this, everything we've built could come crashing down." Kara examined the documents. "This proves there are still elements within the company tied to Phoenix. We need to root them out." Margaret added, "We'll need to tread carefully. If we expose this too quickly, it could destabilize the company entirely." Emily nodded. "Then we'll take it step by step. But make no mistake, this ends now." Amid the internal turmoil, Emily found strength in the communities Ellis Ventures had impacted. She visited a remote village in Africa, where the company's solar panels had brought electricity for the first time. At a small school, she met a young girl named Amara, who dreamed of becoming an engineer. "Thank you for believing in us," Amara said, her eyes shining with hope. Emily smiled, her resolve strengthened. "Never stop dreaming, Amara. The world needs people like you." Back in New York, Emily faced increasing media scrutiny as rumors of Project Phoenix resurfaced. She decided to address the issue head-on, holding a press conference to discuss the company's next steps. "We are aware of past activities that do not align with our values," Emily said. "We are taking every measure to ensure full transparency and accountability. Ellis Ventures will not rest until we've eliminated any trace of corruption." Her honesty won over skeptics, and public support began to shift back in her favor. One night, Emily received an anonymous email with a single line of text: "The truth is closer than you think." Attached was a photograph of her mother, Maria Harper, standing beside an unknown man in front of an Ellis Ventures building. Emily stared at the photo, questions swirling in her mind. Who was this man? And what role did he play in the company's history? As she prepared for bed, Emily knew one thing for certain. Her journey was far from over. Emily Harper sat in her office late at night, staring at the cryptic email and the photograph of her mother, Maria Harper, standing beside a man she didn't recognize. The words from the anonymous sender, "The truth is closer than you think," echoed in her mind. The man in the photo wasn't just anyone. His presence in front of an Ellis Ventures building suggested a deep connection to the company's past. Emily felt an urgent need to uncover who he was and what role he played in the shadowy legacy of the company she was trying to transform. "This ends now," Emily muttered to herself. She picked up her phone and called Kara. The next morning, Kara arrived at Emily's office with her laptop. "This might take a while, but I'll find out who he is," Kara assured her. Emily handed over the photograph. "We need everything: his identity, his connection to my mother, and why he was at Ellis Ventures." As Kara worked, Emily decided to confront Richard. She found him in his Manhattan townhouse, a rare moment of calm, as he sipped coffee by the window. "I need answers," Emily said, placing the photo on the table in front of him. Richard's face darkened as he examined the image. "Where did you get this?" "An anonymous email," Emily replied. "Who is this man? And what does he have to do with us?" Richard hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly. "His name is Victor Rowland. He was once my closest confidant and my greatest rival." Richard's voice was heavy with regret as he explained. "Victor and I built the foundation of Ellis Ventures together, but we had vastly different visions for the company. I wanted to innovate and expand, but Victor, he wanted control. He had no qualms about cutting corners or dealing with unsavory characters to get what he wanted." Emily's heart sank. "And my mother? How does she fit into this?" Richard looked away, a shadow of pain crossing his face. "Victor was obsessed with Maria. When she chose me, he never forgave me. After Maria's death, I severed all ties with him. He disappeared. Or so I thought." Emily's mind raced. Could Victor Rowland be behind the remnants of Project Phoenix? Later that evening, Kara burst into Emily's office, her face pale. "I found him," she said, placing her laptop on the desk. On the screen was a detailed report of Victor Rowland's activities. He had rebranded himself under a new name and was now the head of a shadowy conglomerate involved in various illicit dealings. Emily's stomach churned as she read further. Victor had been funding factions within Ellis Ventures to keep Project Phoenix alive, using the company as a front for money laundering and other criminal activities. "This isn't just about business," Emily said. "This is personal. He's trying to destroy everything we've worked for." As if on cue, Emily's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You're in over your head. Leave before it's too late." Instead of backing down, Emily decided to confront Victor head-on. She arranged a meeting with the board of directors and presented her findings. "We've been fighting an internal battle for integrity, but the real threat lies outside these walls," Emily said. "Victor Rowland is manipulating us from the shadows. We need to take immediate action." The board was initially hesitant. "This could destroy us," one member said. Emily stood firm. "If we don't act now, there won't be a company left to save." She proposed a bold plan, a coordinated legal and media campaign to expose Victor Rowland's operations. With Kara's tech skills and Margaret's network of trusted allies, Emily built an airtight case against Victor. They gathered financial records, intercepted communications, and secured testimonies from former associates willing to speak out. Emily knew that confronting Victor in person was a risk, but she needed to show him that she wouldn't back down. She arranged a meeting in a neutral location, a private conference room at a downtown hotel. Victor arrived, flanked by his own team of advisors. His presence was as intimidating as the man in the photograph. "So, you're the infamous Emily Harper," Victor said, his tone mocking. "You've caused quite a stir." Emily met his gaze, unflinching. "You've been manipulating Ellis Ventures and tarnishing everything we've tried to rebuild. It ends here." Victor leaned back, smirking. "And what exactly do you plan to do? Ruin me? You don't have the power." Emily slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the evidence her team had collected. "Actually, I do," she said. "And by the time this goes public, you'll have nowhere to hide." As Emily predicted, Victor underestimated her resolve. She coordinated with law enforcement and major media outlets to release the evidence. The fallout was immediate and devastating for Victor. His assets were frozen, his associates arrested, and his name dragged through every headline. For Emily, the victory was bittersweet. She had protected Ellis Ventures, but the cost of exposing Victor brought back painful memories of her mother and the dark legacy of the company's past. At a company-wide meeting, Emily addressed her employees. "This has been the fight of a lifetime," she said. "But it's not the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter for Ellis Ventures. Together, we've proven that integrity and perseverance can triumph over greed and corruption." The room erupted in applause. Later that night, Emily received a text from Richard. "You've done more than I ever could. I'm proud of you, Emily." As Emily walked back to her apartment, her phone buzzed with another email. The subject line read, "There's one more thing you should know." Attached was a document titled Maria's Will. Emily opened it, her breath catching as she read the first line. "To my daughter, Emily Harper, I leave the key to a secret that will change everything." Emily Harper sat in her dimly lit apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face as she stared at the document titled Maria's Will. The cryptic line echoed in her mind. "To my daughter, Emily Harper, I leave the key to a secret that will change everything." A series of coordinates was included in the document, along with a brief note in her mother's handwriting. "You'll know when the time is right to use this, my love. Trust your instincts." Emily's chest tightened as she clutched the paper. What could her mother have left behind? And why was it surfacing now? The next morning, Emily shared the discovery with Kara. "This could be anything," Kara said, examining the coordinates. "But if Maria went through the trouble of hiding it, it must be significant." Emily nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "We're going to find out." The coordinates led Emily and Kara to a remote property on the outskirts of Connecticut, a small, unassuming storage facility. Inside the unit linked to Maria's name, they found a locked chest. After hours of trying combinations, Emily recalled something her mother used to say. "Your heart will always lead you to the answer." She punched in her birth date, and the lock clicked open. Inside was a trove of documents, photos, and a leather-bound journal bearing Maria's name. Emily opened it, her mother's words spilling across the pages like echoes from the past. Through the journal, Emily learned the truth about her mother's life before her birth. Maria had been a whistleblower in her own right, exposing a corrupt company she worked for, a subsidiary of what would later become Ellis Ventures. Maria's actions had led to threats against her life, forcing her to disappear and start over. The journal revealed her struggle to protect Emily, while fighting against a system designed to crush people like her. Emily's hands trembled as she flipped through the final pages. Her mother had always been her moral compass, and now, even from beyond the grave, she was guiding her toward the truth. Back at Ellis Ventures, the atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered about the recent scandal, unsure of what the future held. Richard Ellis summoned Emily to his office. "Have you made a decision about your future here?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. Emily looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and determination in her eyes. "I have. I'm staying. But if we're going to move forward, We need to be completely transparent, not just about the company's past, but about mine as well. Richard nodded, his expression filled with pride. I knew you'd say that, and I couldn't be more proud. Emily stood before a sea of reporters and cameras, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. Beside her was Richard, his presence steady and reassuring. Today marks a turning point for Ellis Ventures, Emily began, her voice clear and resolute. For too long, the shadows of the past have dictated our present. But those days are over. We are committed to full transparency, accountability, and using our resources to create a better future. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. I also want to share something personal. My journey here is deeply tied to this company's story. Richard Ellis is not just my mentor, he's my father. This revelation has been as shocking to me as it may be to you. But it's also a reminder that redemption is possible, even in the face of our darkest moments. The room erupted in murmurs, but Emily held her ground. Following the press conference, Emily worked tirelessly to implement reforms at Ellis Ventures. She introduced policies focused on corporate transparency, ethical governance, and sustainable growth. The company launched an initiative to support whistleblowers, offering them resources and protections. Emily believed that empowering individuals to speak out against corruption was the first step toward systemic change. One afternoon, Richard called a meeting with Emily in his office. It's time, he said simply. Emily frowned. Time for what? For me to step down, Richard replied. This company needs a leader with a vision for the future, someone who isn't tied to the mistakes of the past. That person is you. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Dad, are you sure? You've built this company from the ground up. Richard smiled. I've built it as far as I can. You'll take it farther. At Richard's retirement celebration, Emily gave a heartfelt speech. This isn't just the end of an era, she said, but the beginning of a new chapter. One where Ellis Ventures will stand as a beacon of integrity, innovation, and impact. I'm honored to lead us into that future. Richard watched from the sidelines, his pride evident as he saw his daughter step fully into her role as CEO. Emily wasted no time launching her first major project, a global initiative to provide clean energy solutions to underprivileged communities. This isn't just about business, she said at the project's unveiling. It's about building a future where everyone has access to opportunities and resources. The initiative was met with widespread praise, solidifying Ellis Ventures' reputation as a leader in corporate responsibility. As Emily settled into her role as CEO, she received one final surprise. A letter from Maria, still tucked into the pages of her journal, written for a day like this. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way. You've faced challenges I couldn't have imagined, but I always knew you were strong enough to overcome them. Remember, true leadership isn't about power, it's about service. Keep shining, my love. The world needs your light. Love. Mom tears filled Emily's eyes as she folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. One night, as Emily prepared to leave the office, a courier arrived with an envelope marked urgent. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message. You've made enemies, Emily. Watch your back. Emily's resolve hardened. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Ellis Ventures' newly built headquarters in New York City, illuminating the bustling hive of activity within. Emily Harper, now 33, stood at the center of it all, a symbol of resilience and integrity. Under her leadership, Ellis Ventures had undergone a complete transformation. The company, once mired in controversy, now led the way in corporate responsibility, innovation, and philanthropy. Today, Emily prepared to launch the company's most ambitious project yet, a global initiative to deliver clean energy and education to underserved communities worldwide. As Emily reviewed the final details for the launch, she reflected on her journey. From a waitress in a Manhattan restaurant to the CEO of a multinational corporation, the path had been anything but smooth. Every challenge, every betrayal, and every difficult decision had shaped her into the leader she was today. Her office bore testament to her transformation. Photos of her and her late mother, Maria, shared space with awards recognizing her contributions to business and society. A framed copy of Maria's final letter sat on her desk, reminding Emily of the values that guided her. Emily's assistant, Rachel, entered the office, her face tight with concern. "Miss Harper, there's been a development," Rachel said, handing over a file. Emily opened it and quickly scanned the contents. It was an investigative report detailing a smear campaign against Ellis Ventures. Anonymous sources were accusing the company of greenwashing, falsely promoting their sustainability efforts, while engaging in unethical practices behind closed doors. Emily's jaw tightened. "Who's behind this?" "We suspect it's one of our competitors, but we don't have solid proof yet," Rachel replied. Emily closed the file and stood. "Prepare a press statement. We'll address this head on." The following day, Emily held a press conference to respond to the allegations. "At Ellis Ventures, we have nothing to hide," Emily declared, her voice steady and resolute. "We invite independent auditors to examine our operations. Transparency is not just a policy here, it's a commitment." Her openness disarmed critics and strengthened the company's credibility. When the auditors confirmed Ellis Ventures' ethical practices, the tide turned, and public support for the company grew even stronger. The culmination of 5 years of effort, the Global Impact Initiative, was launched with great fanfare. The program aimed to install solar panels in rural villages, provide scholarships for education, and train local entrepreneurs in sustainable practices. Standing before an audience of investors, employees, and community leaders, Emily delivered a powerful speech. This initiative isn't just about clean energy or education. It's about creating opportunities where none existed before. It's about empowering people to build better futures for themselves and their communities. Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation. Watching from the sidelines was Richard Ellis. Now retired, he had become a vocal advocate for corporate transparency and ethical leadership. After the event, he approached Emily, his face filled with pride. "You've done it, Emily," he said. "You've turned this company into something I never imagined it could be. A true force for good." Emily smiled, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without your support, Dad." Just as Emily began to feel a sense of accomplishment, her past resurfaced. A letter arrived at her office, its contents sending a chill down her spine. "I'm not done, Emily. You and your company will pay for what you've done." It was signed, Daniel Roberts. Emily clenched her fists. Her ex-husband's vendetta was far from over. Emily wasted no time involving her legal team. She also reached out to law enforcement, determined to protect the company from Daniel's threats. Over the next few months, Daniel's schemes unraveled. Evidence emerged, linking him to fraudulent activities and attempts to bribe journalists to fabricate stories about Ellis Ventures. When the case finally went to trial, Emily testified, her composure unwavering. The court ruled in her favor, sentencing Daniel to a lengthy prison term for his crimes. With the legal battle behind her, Emily turned her focus back to the future. She launched a mentorship program to guide young entrepreneurs in ethical business practices, ensuring that the lessons she had learned would ripple outward. Ellis Ventures also expanded its philanthropic efforts, partnering with global organizations to address climate change, poverty, and education disparities. At a leadership conference held in San Francisco, Emily was the keynote speaker. The audience, filled with aspiring leaders, hung on her every word. True success isn't about power or wealth, Emily said. It's about the impact you leave on the world. Every decision we make, every action we take, shapes the legacy we leave behind. Choose to be a force for good. Her speech earned thunderous applause, cementing her status as a visionary leader. That evening, back in her hotel room, Emily received a video call from Richard. "You were incredible today," he said, his face glowing with pride. "Thanks, Dad," Emily replied, her smile genuine. Richard leaned closer to the camera. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "I hope so." 5 years later, Emily's vision had transformed Ellis Ventures into a global leader in sustainable innovation. The company's initiatives had positively impacted millions of lives, and Emily's story was studied in business schools around the world. As she prepared for yet another impactful day, Emily looked at the photograph of her mother on her desk. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. Outside her office window, the city buzzed with life, a testament to the enduring impact of her choices. Emily Harper's journey was far from over, but one thing was certain: her legacy would live on, inspiring generations to come. What would you do if you were in Emily's shoes? Would you have had the courage to stand by your values, even when the stakes were impossibly high? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you think, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey of incredible stories. There's so much more to come. Stories of resilience, redemption, and the power of doing what's right. You won't want to miss what's next. See you in the next chapter.